I'm going to wait just a few more minutes and then we'll start the formal introduction. I'm Carol Stone, and along with Jeanette Zernicke, who's here, we are co-chairs of the Environmental Concerns Group of the League of Women Voters, Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville. And tonight is our speaker series. And we are very, very pleased to have Alec McDonald. And full disclosure, Ruby and Bob McDonald, who are attending here, are his parents, but they had absolutely zero to do with inviting him to speak tonight. It was entirely my idea, and I actually approached them to get his number because I have been following the Monitor for many years. And Alec was very instrumental in Bay Area League Day, planning luncheons and organizing for those events for the entire Bay Area League. So I thought he would make a very fine speaker. And by way of introduction, Alec Yoshio McDonald is a journalist who writes frequently about the environment. He's currently the editor, as we should all know, of the Bay Area Monitor, a magazine about environmental policy published by the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area. He also works as a freelance book editor, currently under contract with Strauss Literary. Formerly, he was a reporter for a number of different publications, and he continues to contribute to the news, to various newspapers. And he has written also for the East Bay Express and the San Francisco Weekly. He has completed a DAT winning fellowship and produced a multimedia oral history project about post-war community sports for the Chicago Japanese American Historical Society. Alec holds a bachelor's degree in literature from UC Berkeley and a master's degree in the humanities from the University of Chicago. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Alec McDonald.
Thanks very much, Carol. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. And thank you to everybody for joining us. I feel honored and hope I can provide a little bit of useful information to what is a well-respected and highly useful speaker series that Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville puts on. So I'm not just saying that because my mother is the president. So yeah, I think that kind of covers my background. I'm going to see if I can share a screen here. Seems like I can. All right, are we all able to see that? Yeah, okay. Super duper. Okay, so I guess people are, am I the only one who's able to admit as we go, or Carol, are you admitting too when the people pop up?
I'm admitting people.
Okay, cool. All right, so I am going to talk about tonight how we cover the environment in the news media and what I think we can improve upon in order to confront the specter of climate change and the various environmental problems that face us as a society and in our own communities. Obviously, I'm going to do this through the lens of the Bay Area Monitor. It's where I have the most experience in that kind of coverage. But I also want to think about how the larger media ecosystem addresses these problems, because I think there's, like I said, room for improvement. I have some things to say, and then I think towards the end, I would really like to hear what you all have on your minds as well. What kind of opinions, perspectives, feedback you might be able to offer, because I think, well, as I'll get into later, the monitor is in need of that feedback. But also I think that sitting here and yakking at you for however long is probably going to get kind of dull. And although, as I was telling Carol before we let everybody in from the waiting room, although I've done this a lot, it's always been in front of a live audience, like in person. Zoom is not a space that I am, particularly experienced in. And so it's harder for me to read the room. So if people start to, fall asleep, I'm not going to know. So I'm just going to make sure that we stay engaged at the end by hoping that we can chat a little bit. So anyway, assuming everybody can see this screen okay, and I feel like a little bit of it's getting cut off. Let me see if I can adjust that. Okay. I'm going to end up also reading, like, they say when you do presentations, do not read from your own slides. Sort of the 101 of a bad presentation is to show a slide and then just read from it. Due to the fact that we're on Zoom, I may end up doing that, so I'm apologizing in advance. But anyway, so we've already started the introduction. I'm going to give you some, because as I said, this presentation is necessarily through the lens of the Bay Area Monitor and my experience there. I think it's important for us to, and I know a lot of you are already familiar with this history, but to revisit that history and kind of get a sense of the origins of the Monitor as a publication and how it operated within the league and kind of its goals and such. And then, talk a little bit more broadly, as I said before, about how news covers environmental questions, specifically climate change, but also other kinds of problems that we face on an environmental wavelength. Pivot back to kind of what the Monitor has been doing more recently to address what I feel is somewhat of a deficiency in current news coverage of environmental problems. And then, like I say, open it up to the floor for us to talk more loosely. So here's a question for you to ponder, to think about why the news media exists. And I should say, I'm generally focusing not only specifically on the Monitor, but also on print media. I think television news is a companion to that, but there are some differences there. Most of what I say is going to be relating to newspapers, magazines, and their internet counterparts. So, the question that I ask myself often is, why do we have news media? Do the people do it so they can make money? Do they do it for the more nebulous goal of, we often say, raising awareness? Or is there perhaps other reasons that news exists? Why do we consume news? Why is it important to us? What roles does it play in our lives? Something to think about as we go. This is another downfall of Zoom, because I know when I show this slide in other presentations, I always get a reaction. I don't know why President Richard Milhouse Nixon gets a reaction when you show his picture at a crowd of League of Women Voters audience, but he does. And I'm just going to give away what the question is, what's he doing? And the answer is he is signing the 1970 Clean Air Act. This was reinforcing a previous iteration of the, or an original form of that legislation, which I guess was said to have not as much teeth. And this one brought in some standards that jurisdictions would have to meet in terms of emissions of things like carbon monoxide, mainly emissions coming from cars, which had, since World War II really proliferated and thereby created a lot of air pollution, right? So it needed to be addressed. And so in 1970, they went ahead and did that. This meant that people needed to comply to the regulation, and to comply, they needed to know about it. And so if you think back to the 60s and the 70s, the news media infrastructure was much less robust than it is now. There was no Facebook, there's no social media, Twitter, no 24/7 cable news channels. And so getting information out about whatever you wanted to was not as easy. So administrators of the regulations had a bit of a dilemma in doing that. And I should say as I go that this is based on reporting that, or I don't know if you'd call it reporting, but Leslie Stewart, my predecessor, the previous editor of the Bay Area Monitor, has written about this history, and you can find it on our website. This is maybe 5 or 6 years ago. If there's some sort of follow-up, I can provide a website link. But anyway, so credit to Leslie for doing this information gathering. So when the EPA was looking to do outreach, it so happened that the Region 9 administrator was someone named Paul DeFalco, which I think some of you folks may have known him. And so he was looking to conduct outreach to Bay Area municipalities to get them on board with sort of understanding what they were going to have to do to comply to the Clean Air Act and sort of what those stipulations were going to be. And so he recruited the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area to do this. And at first it was through a in-person presentation. It was done by a film strip, and leagues would go out to community groups and make a presentation about the Clean Air Act. And I guess it was quite popular because as this project continued, league leaders and I suppose the people who received the presentation decided it was important enough that the written reports that were coming were developed as part of this were useful to have. And so what ended up happening then was that the EPA funded a publication called the Transportation Alternatives Project that was sort of giving a sense of how air pollution was being dealt with through policies, how these standards from the Clean Air Act were going to be met. And so the EPA funded this publication and hired a leaguer named Holly Hollingsworth as its first editor. I have on this slide Paul and his wife Ernestine. Ernestine was the Bay Area Monitor editor after Holly, but I think it's probably worth noting that she was not the first editor, and it probably wouldn't look so great to have your wife lead up the project that you were the one helping to fund. Moving on. So this is the first edition. So I said it was the TAP at first, but then it became named as, in its current form, the Bay Area Monitor. It was printed on a mimeograph machine, which I've never seen a mimeograph machine before. Maybe some of you have. Apparently it's a device that presses ink through holes. So certainly not a laser printer quality or anything of the technological advancements that we enjoy these days. Certainly not an iPad. But this was distributed to not only interested parties throughout the region, but primarily to elected officials. So city council members, county supervisors, state legislators, which would form the bulk of the monitor audience ever since. So I think it's always kind of fun to tootle through these old editions. You can kind of see, a window into the past. So, with its roots in air quality, and then of course the source of the air pollution that it was talking about, transportation, those were the two kind of main coverage areas for early editions of the Monitor. I don't know at which point, but around about, I think the 80s, the EPA took a step back, and the funder of the publication primarily became the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which does still fund us to some extent today. Excuse me. Glad I got my water ahead of time. So, the publication continued throughout over the years, and as it went, it evolved, eventually starting to cover such things that were still environmental, but outside of the realm of air quality and transportation, things pertaining to water, pertaining to open space, occasionally housing. The emphasis generally was on regional policy, so anything that crossed county lines within the 9-county Bay Area was fair game. And as you can see here, sometimes heading up towards Sacramento or other parts of the state. So that's 87, 97. You see the new look there. This cover story on the Fruitvale Transit Village. Ferries. So I think this would have been under Leslie's tenure. So I think in the history of the Monitor, there may have only been 4 editors, Holly to start, Ernestine, Leslie, and then myself. And I hope I'm not missing anybody. I came on board in 2006. So this is one of my early editions. Still very transit focused, but you can also see starting to try to expand a little bit out to the green cleaning is an article about kind of the chemicals used for janitorial services and what is safe and what is not. I had a bad habit back in the day of having kind of enigmatic titles, as you could see in the issue contents there. So in 2000, the history of the Monitor mainly was of one editor sort of managing the project and pulling in a writer or two. But in 2014, we tried to expand our writer group a little bit. And so that started to take shape with the bringing on of our first kind of dedicated water writer, Robin Meadows, who many of you may know. She writes for Estuary News. If you are interested in water quality and estuary/delta policy, I really recommend you check out Estuary News. It's a very similar to us, similar scope, some of the same writers, a lot of policy, a lot of programs out of Sacramento. Definitely worth your time. So we brought Robin on in 2014, sort of to round out a more robust and comprehensive water beat for us. That's also the year we went color. The cost of color printing went down, and so we were able to get a more catchy look. And then we went to more of a full magazine, 12-page, boosting our page count and front and back cover to kind of try to be more alluring. So this is the first edition that we did that. This particular cover story was about Bay Area Green Print was a mapping technology that was developed by open space interests that would allow you to see a the various facets of the Bay Area for planning purposes, whether they would be useful for open space, whether they could be developed. So kind of an interesting, innovative tool there. I want to say, I think it was the following year, we got a grant from Craig Newmark Philanthropies to do a new website. And so we sort of launched some more robust online programming around that. Craig Newmark, as you know, or may not, is the founder of Craigslist, which is coincidentally how I came across the monitor job in the first place. Craigslist is responsible for a dramatic shift in revenue from newspapers, whereby your newspaper used to have classified ads that brought in a lot of money to the newspaper. When Craig Newmark started Craigslist, a lot of that money went to him instead. And so a lot of people point to Craigslist as a sort of, I wouldn't say the beginning of the end, but definitely a blow to print media. And I think has created some of the problems that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But he did give us money for a website, so hey. So on our current website, we have not only the print edition in full layout and in HTML, but we also offer these weekly sort of, I wouldn't call it quick hits exactly, but our transportation reporter, Cecily O'Connor, produces a maybe 500 word email newsletter that will cover 4 or 5 items related to the monitor's general coverage area. These, we'll talk about this later, but are intended to be somewhat participatory and give you as a recipient opportunities to kind of learn more or find out about webinars or other kinds of more active ways of being a reader for the monitor. Other ways to be active are on Facebook and Twitter, which is of course your standard for any media outlet is to be on social media and to try and reach audiences in that way. That brings me to back to the larger media ecosystem in general, and my kind of issue with it, and how I feel that the monitor can perhaps intervene and provide a different kind of model for specifically covering environmental news, although I think this does apply in other topic areas as well. So one article or anecdote that I like to discuss with the writers at the monitor and with kind of anybody who will hear me out in general is this article that I read in the New York Times Magazine when it came out in 2001, 20 years ago. And at the time, it blew me away. I thought I was just like, this is amazing and it's really frightening. So the cover article was about toxic mold. It focused on specifically a family residence in Texas. I want to say Austin, I could be wrong. And it was a very lengthy 7,000 word piece. Not only did it recount the just terrible experiences of this poor family. Well, actually, they were very rich, as you can tell from the paragraph that I pulled out here. That their house had been inundated with this black mold, and it had caused all kinds of health problems. And I remember reading this at the time, 20 years ago, and thinking, this is big. This is going to be a real problem for all of us. Like, we need to watch out. And I'm just taking my cues from what I read in the piece. It seemed like the author was really forecasting a trend and something that people are going to have to react to. So I'm just going to, like I said, I'm going to read from the screen, which is a faux pas for, PowerPoint presentations, but I think Zoom, I hope you'll forgive me. So Lisa Belkin writes in Haunted by Mold, warning, reading this story might make you sick. Not as sick as Melinda Ballard and her family, who began coughing up blood and suffering memory loss while living in this 22-room, 11,000 square foot mansion. But it could make your skin itch and your throat hurt, and you could start to cough. Then you'll wonder whether there is toxic mold growing in your house too, and whether you should pay someone a great deal of money to come find out. So I think this passage is interesting to me because it not only demonstrates the sort of edge example of how bad this phenomenon, this environmental problem could be, but it also concedes, shall we say, the fact that reading the beast can have a psychological effect on you, whether or not toxic mold is going to have a psychological effect on you, right? So read the whole thing and you start to get scared. Now, I found this from the San Diego Union Tribune, published many years later. It's a myth debunker, and it's kind of long. I'll run through it though, just to keep up with my faux pas. In 2004, the National Institute of Medicine published its comprehensive study on indoor mold exposure called Damp Indoor Spaces and Health. The central finding was scientific evidence links mold in homes and buildings to asthma symptoms in some people with the chronic disorder, as well as the coughing, wheezing, upper respiratory tract symptoms in otherwise healthy people. However, the available evidence does not support an association between mold and the wide range of other health complaints that have been ascribed. It sounds like mold is dangerous, the same as is dust or pollen, to people with severe asthma. The announcement containing this finding is easily located by a web search, but it did not receive much press play. And of course, the payoff line, stories of frightened people living in tents are more interesting. So I think you may understand where I'm getting at here. But to spell it out, the concern I have with the way in which we cover environmental problems now is that we have a tendency to focus on fear and to scare people as much as possible. Well, why do we do this? In part, it's because we need to make money. If you are writing a newspaper, you're getting money from your readers who are subscribing to your newspaper, or if they're generous, they'll be donating something. You're also getting money from advertisers, and maybe you're getting money from a place like Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Maybe you're getting it from Knight Foundation or any number of these other media supporting entities that are meant to keep newspapers afloat or to spark innovation, find out new ways to support journalism. So the thing that has happened, as the case of Craigslist demonstrates, but in general, the internet has the effect of making us believe that everything we see on it is free. So then it becomes much harder to convince people that they should be paying for a reporter's hard work. I tie that personally to the lack of a physical product. Now, if you go by a newsstand and there's somebody selling a newspaper, you wouldn't just pick it up and walk off with it, right? It is a physical product. And so the way in which capitalism operates, if you take a physical object from somebody, you pay that person. The fact that the internet is not a physical object takes that piece out of the routine. So it doesn't even occur to you that you would need to pay for something that's online. Some of us, of course, realize this, but I think a large percentage of the population does not. And I think our younger folks who are growing up online much more than older generations are even more instinctively of the mindset that the internet equals free, right? So that leaves, that sort of diminishes category one. Subscriptions drop, so you don't get money there. Where are you getting your money from? Well, then you have to get money from advertisers. And how do you get money from advertisers? Well, you have to tell them that you have a lot of people who are looking at your publication, because that means a lot of those people are looking at their ads, which means those people are then buying whatever services those folks are advertising. So the best way, well, not the best, but a effective way to bring lots of people to your publication is, well, there are a couple that I'd like to highlight. Here's one. This is the part of the presentation where Pixar sues me for copyright infringement. But a good way to get people to pay attention is to scare them, as with toxic mold. Another way, which I'm not going to focus on too much, but still exists, is just to get them riled up. And I think, Berkeley League has talked a little bit about, I know this, there was a presentation on it a couple years ago about Facebook and kind of, so I think that the familiarity and awareness among the group that's with us here tonight at this Zoom is high, understanding that social media is a very contentious space, and people have learned that you can attract a lot of attention by making people angry. I think our past president was very adept at this particular technique. That's why he got so much attention himself. But these are the two kinds of go-to easy strategies that anybody who's seeking attention can rely upon. Emotion in general is just a great way to tap into human motivation. There are other ways to tap into human motivation that is sort of beyond the purview of news operations. So what comes to mind, and I hope I'm not going too far afield here, is the food industry is very good at motivating people to buy their products by filling them with salt, sugar, and fat, right? So any capitalist entity that wants to turn a profit would be wise to pander to human beings' most deeply sort of ingrained instincts. So in the case of news, it can often be, unfortunately for us, fear and anger. The reason that I find this to be, well, there's several reasons this is troubling, but I think one problem with being confronted with articles about climate change that make you afraid or make you angry is that there isn't any productive result, or oftentimes there is limited opportunity to have a productive result as the reader. You are likely to, in addition to feeling afraid or feeling angry, you may feel powerless. You may feel like, what can I possibly do in the face of this massive phenomenon, which is increasing temperatures globally, which means it's hurting food production in our agricultural systems, which means that our sea levels are rising and will encroach upon our homes. It means the health impacts, especially for vulnerable communities in terms of the air quality that they are experiencing in places like the Port of Oakland or up in Richmond at the refineries. When confronted with these stories, I don't know about you all, but my inclination is to go crawl into a corner and start crying because, it's overwhelming and it's really inciting of despair. So today I went on to the Chronicle's kind of, the Chronicle has kind of two websites. There's sort of formal, upstanding, Chronicle.com, SF Chronicle. And then there are kind of more fun, for lack of a better word, site SF Gate, which tends to run things that are a little bit less, well, I don't know that I need to go into I'm sure you're all familiar with these two sites, but I went on to SF Gate just today, not just a few hours ago, in fact, and took a look at what they had. So the most popular article for today, the font is a little small, I don't know if you can read it, but the headline is, "This has never happened. California's only wildfire research center makes scary discovery." So I'm just going to be obvious and just go back here, right? This is what they're playing on. Also, the headline is written in such a way that we don't even know what the discovery is. But if we click on that, then we'll find out, right? So it's part of the strategy to influence our news consumption behavior. So when we do click on that, we're greeted with an article about how folks at this research center had discovered that the moisture content of a lot of the vegetation that they're observing was diminished. And so that means that our wildfire season is poised to be more intense or more threatening. So not anything particularly new, distressing nonetheless. I'd like to point to you the landing page that you get to. So this is the second, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is the second, I think, paragraph. This is the third. This is just a screenshot of the website. And what I'd like to point out is that I'd say 20% of it is article text, and that 40% of it is advertising. So you can buy apparently a necklace for your kids. I'm not sure what they're selling over here. And then there's some sort of video rental. That actually might be some sort of Chronicle article. But in any case, there's a lot of ways to get you to click on other things and to provide metrics for the advertisers to demonstrate that they should be paying the Chronicle money. This to me is disappointing because not only are we afraid and perhaps powerless to do anything with the information that we've learned, but we're also distracted. There's a lot of opportunities to derail our reading experience, to buy necklaces, and to lose focus on what the point of this whole thing is. So this is a little, well, this is more than a little, this is self-serving, but I would point you to Leslie Stewart's article on a similar subject from the current edition of the Monitor out April 1, so 2 weeks before this Chronicle article ran. Leslie wrote about biomass, so kind of the same thing that the Chronicle is covering, basically the fuel for wildfires and how we need to reduce it so that we don't have as many wildfires. Now, the contrast I'd like to draw for you is that Monitor coverage, as it is now, as our orientation has been more recently, is, well, actually for some time now, has been to highlight success stories. So, you know, without trying to be, you know, blindly optimistic, we do try to look for, if not silver linings, ways in which different stakeholders, be they community members, elected officials, scientists, environmental advocates, and a whole host of folks within this community are coming up with solutions to the problems that we face. And so Leslie's article kind of goes into generally the problem of biomass and how it creates, you know, fires and how the fires are going to get worse, but also the article focuses on how we can reduce the amount of biomass that's available for these fires, and so then hopefully to diminish the fires themselves. The article includes a coverage of a contest that's being sponsored by the Northern Sonoma County Air Quality Management District, not the Bay Area Air Quality Management District that you all are probably more familiar with. And this contest, which you can find online and which we link to. I don't like to link to stuff on our website because it, per my previous comment about advertising, it pulls people away from the point of being there in the first place and learning about the story. But from our website, you can go to that contest and you can find out what kinds of solutions the Air District is trying to get people to brainstorm about. Theoretically, any one of us could go on there and offer an idea, but I think in this instance, it's a little bit more specialized. I think the kinds of people who are going to enter this contest and to provide solutions for the district are probably of a bit narrower community, probably people who are in that area of the Bay Area and who have work experience within forest management or biofuels or that kind of thing. But it still draws I think, an apt comparison to the coverage I mentioned in the Chronicle, and also highlights how we're just trying to showcase opportunities for people to be part of the solution. And again, at the risk of being a little too promotional here, I want to point out that our only advertisement is, well, let's just say our percentage of ad content to news content is much more favorable. Let's put it that way. So we're back to this question. What does the news media exist to do? And I think if you were to look at that Chronicle page, you'd say maybe it exists to make money. It is nice that we know about what the Resource Center found out about, wildfire and moisture content in fuels. That is useful, but is that information going to make us, what's that information going to do for us? Is it just going to give us nightmares? Is it going to keep us up at night? Is it going to give us a heart attack? So en route to answer for that blank, I want to take a quick detour to the Berkeley League's page, specifically the mission. I went to the League of Women Voters of the United States page, and they seem to have changed. I don't know. The mission is not easily accessible. So thank you to the Berkeley League to making it up front. The point that I want to focus on in terms of our mission is here. I'm highlighting it, even though it's already highlighted, to encourage more active and informed participation of citizens in government. Right. So the word I'm focusing on here is participation. So I don't know about the rest of the news media, but the Monitor exists, as I see it, to increase our participation in solutions, or at least in efforts. If we're not going to solve every problem. Let's be honest, but at least to join in on effort to attempt to make a difference, to resist the damaging and destructive forces that we're all facing. So that's what the Monitor is trying to do, is provide those opportunities. So just to give you a sense, this is I'm just pandering to the audience here, but in a very basic way, we recognize that we are published by the League, by the Bay Area League in particular, but that we are very much anchored in voting and voter service. And so, one form of participation is to encourage voting. And so the first cover image here from 2018 is your previous Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville president, Adina Ishii, registering voters at Berkeley High. So the monitor is a little anomalous in terms of league programming in that it does not have the same kind of election centric calendar that so much of the rest of league activity does. But we do like to, when the opportunity arises, acknowledge that elections are happening and to talk about the kinds of policies that we highlight and how they may intersect with ballot measures. So point being, one of the very fundamental ways that, the monitor encourages this kind of participation, I'm just going to bounce back to that one more time, existing to increase participation. One of the most fundamental ways you can participate in improving your community is to vote. But we have other kinds of avenues as well. So the other cover here is coincidentally, our cover model is Peter Krieger. He is a member of the League of Women Voters of Oakland. And he is demonstrating what is known as a drain adoption program. Various water agencies have these. So during rainstorms in the Bay Area, and I assume other places, detritus from not just the natural environment, but also garbage, unfortunately, often clogs storm drains, creating flooding and problems for our stormwater system. But one thing that individual residents can do is to go out and unclog those drains. So I took this picture. That drain, just 1 minute before, all it took was a couple of pokes from that stick that Peter's holding, and it opened up the drain, and what was a standing pool of water covering his boots turned into a normal city street. Once again, thanks to his willingness to roll up his sleeves and do his part. So this was an article that highlighted that program. It's actually, I say program, it's it's something that multiple water agencies do. East Bay Mud does it here in the East Bay, but SFPUC does it in the city. I assume other places do it as well. So that's the kind of thing where the news consumer can gain ownership over the story that they're reading about. They learn a little bit about their, this is the raise awareness piece, which I think I used to sort of talk about in these vague yet aspirational terms of how it's so important to raise awareness. And it is, but sometimes that's just a little too fluffy. I'm not trying to poo-poo it or anything, but now a reader who has found out about kind of this problem has an entry point to help be a part of the solution. So other coverage, sort of going along the lines of what a person can do, by herself. These are recent stories that kind of highlight entry points and opportunities. So, for example, Leslie's December story about how our food system contributes a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, primarily through animal husbandry, or I guess, the production and consumption of animal meat. And so not only did Leslie's article kind of talk about this sector of greenhouse gas emissions, but she also provided some encouragement for people who maybe want to reduce the carbon footprint that's on their dinner plate, right? The amount of emissions that they're contributing when they go to the grocery store, they can do something about that, right? And she's providing some information on that. Another one at the top here, and again, I'm not sure how well, I think my cursor is. Mom, will you nod if you can see my cursor? Okay, so thank you. So this article that Leslie did was our cover for February 2019, and it was about advances in air quality monitoring technology. So, you know, in the time since the Clean Air Act, there have been massive technological innovations, and we are now at the point where you, the resident of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville, or anywhere else, can procure for a relatively affordable price a air quality monitor. You can hook it up somewhere around your property, and you can then tap that into a wider network of air quality monitoring sensors. And that will inform a database that can give you, or anybody who logs on, a sense of what the air quality is on a given day or throughout history, right? And so this is very useful to public health officials. It's useful to scientists, and it just advances our understanding of this threat to our well-being. So that's an entry point. Our cover, I would have liked to put I sort of, you know, was throwing slides together this afternoon, so couldn't get the razzle dazzle of the most beautiful presentation, but our cover for this edition was a gentleman living in Lafayette who had one of these monitors, and he showed it to me, you know, kind of gave me a sense of what compelled him to be a part of this. And you know, he was recognized not only by the monitor and putting him on the cover, but also by the Lafayette City Council, right? This was something that they were feeling was, you know, an upright kind of a thing to do. And so he was acknowledged for that. And I think that that's good. And that's kind of something that we like to do in the monitor too. So going down to Alita's Rules of the Trail article, I pulled that one out just because it's another kind of personal prescription type of a thing, where kind of like Leslie's article about food and how you can adjust your diet to, you know, decrease its carbon footprint. His article about trail usage is kind of sort of rules of the trail, ways to be a responsible and respectful hiker, covering such things as how to hike around cows, but also, I think more importantly for me at least, how to not leave your dog's poop on the trail. So, you know, just being a better community member, like that kind of advice. And then all centered around National Trail Day, which, you know, again, is kind of a way to encourage people to get outside and, you know, in doing so, to feel more connected with their environment, which if you're going to save the environment, you better feel connected to it. And so that's an important step towards kind of forming that relationship and, you know, building a basis for which you are motivated to then help. And then Alita's article in the other corner here is about efforts to, and we do this a lot of the monitors. This is a pretty common kind of article, but to infuse sustainability in your neighborhood. She's specifically highlighting the efforts of some nonprofits. I think this one in Vallejo, I think it was called Sustainable Solano, whereby the nonprofit experts come into a neighborhood, they help with tree planting, they help with gray water systems, growing food, you know, more water-wise options for your lawn, all things that will reduce carbon footprints, conserve resources, and potentially create habitat for species. And again, this is the kind of thing where were you to want to do something like this in your neighborhood, you could consult with Sustainable Solano or connect with some of these folks to you know, learn how you might be able to do something like they're doing. moving on. So that was kind of the individual level opportunity for participation. Now, the bread and butter of the monitor really is more the policy level intervention, which makes sense, right? If you think about it, kind of, I know not everybody on this call is necessarily a league member, but you know, anybody who's been around the league for any length of time understands that league members pride themselves on being highly literate in policy and in the affairs of government, and in the public process of that government. So a lot of our articles are intended to provide a background in policy that gives the reader information and inspiration to then comment on a plan. So, you know, in the example here in Alita's article about layered trails, this was a look at the way in which trails provide more than just a opportunity to connect with nature, but also an opportunity to connect with history and community and culture. But the reason I included here is because these trails that she focused on as part of a sort of broader commentary on multifaceted trails, the trails that she used as her showcase examples were all under development. And so, and unfortunately, we didn't put this in online, but in your print edition, at the end of the article, it has the source's email addresses, and it says, if you have ideas for how these folks can develop their trails, you can contact them, right? And so the concept is that I go in and I read about what Trax is doing in Richmond to develop the Point Mulate stretch of the Bay Trail. And I hear kind of some of the ideas they're working on, maybe some of the challenges that they're facing, and maybe I know that area. Coincidentally, I was there yesterday. That's a complete coincidence. I didn't even think about it till now, but and I can then have an entry point to contact the people who are working on this, and to have my voice heard and potentially influence how this trail gets developed and how the experience of that trail is shaped for future users. So that's really kind of like, you know, whereas I think I like to talk about drain adoption and those types of personal opportunities. I will say that the monitor is, because of our basis in league, is really quite focused on getting people into the public comment, getting folks to email their comments to the public information offices of different government agencies, to show up to meetings. Obviously, we can't do that now, but and to testify, right? I'm sure a lot of people on this Zoom right now have been in front of the microphone to elected officials and spoke your piece. And that's partially what we're trying to do, is to empower those people, to make them aware of the different facets and the different players who are involved, different resources, so that then they can jump in and give their 2 cents on something. I throw Robin's article on otters in there, in part because it's one of our most successful. We've been running web analysis lately, and apparently everybody loves our otter article. So that's one that I put there, but in it, Robin is exploring the possibility that we bring sea otters back to the bay. And they used to be here, and some scientists are thinking about reintroducing them. And as I said before, a lot of our readership happens to be elected officials. And so one kind of fun piece of this story is that a city council member from Emeryville actually contacted Robin and said, this is fascinating, and it's something that I'd like to think about more, and maybe we can explore the possibility of you know, what can be done to bring these fuzzy, adorable creatures back to the bay. So I'm looking at the time and I've been an hour deep, but I'm towards the end of my slides here. And then I think we can open it up and for a little bit of a chat because I am running out of saliva and I'm sure you all are getting a little bit tired of hearing me drone on. But I think one thing that we have also implemented in recent years with our web redesign was to do what I mentioned earlier in the presentation of instead of just the long form articles, or in addition to the long form articles, also provide a weekly newsletter that highlights in much shorter form, perhaps more digestible form, opportunities for public participation. Now this newsletter is produced by our transportation reporter, Cecily O'Connor, who's been doing it, I guess, for 3 or 3 years, 3 years, I want to say. And it's sent out via email every Wednesday, and it contains 4 items, 4 or 5 items, and often they're about webinars that you can learn more about environmental topics. They may be calls for public comment from government agencies who are trying to develop, say, a bicycle plan or a Vision Zero traffic accident reduction plan or a clean water plan or a recycled water plan or various other kinds of programs and policies that demand stakeholder input. And so we want to alert our readers to the fact that they can give that input, right? There's also surveys. So maybe a transit agency is considering what kind of, whether or not there is receptiveness to a fare increase or a new program that's targeting a specific constituency, maybe the elderly, maybe youth. And so they need to get feedback on their plan. And so we'll let you know about a survey that you can take. So that's what's kind of been driving the notes that we've been putting out, just a little bit more direct kind of to the point, like this is the way to get involved, as opposed to, you know, a longer article, which I think is my first love, but I understand is not everybody's preference. So to go through that. So as I wrap, having said all this, we at the Monitor now are, I mentioned that the news media in general has a bit of a revenue problem. We don't even have subscribers in a revenue sense. We provide our publication for free. We have been having difficulties since the financial crisis of 2007, but in the last 2 years have seen sort of significant cuts to our budget. And so have been reckoning with an eventuality that I think most of us knew for some time, that we are going to discontinue our print publication. So I guess from an environmental standpoint, there's a case to be made that this is a positive. I'm not sure I feel that way. I'm not going to get into the kind of into the weeds on, you know, reading in print versus reading online and sort of the different kinds of, I think the advantages of a paper product may outweigh their slim environmental downside, but that's a debate for another time. What I mean to focus on now is the fact that June will be our last print edition. And in July, we are looking to reconfigure the website so that instead of publication of a magazine every 2 months, we will be sort of slowly releasing content on a more incremental basis. Our kind of the way in which our readers will interact with us will necessarily change. Also to announce with that, I will be stepping back from my role, and we are bringing on someone else to manage the project. You will see my byline on occasion. I still intend to be involved as a contributor and as an advisor. But things are changing at the Monitor. And so that is an excellent segue to an open discussion about ways in which, if you have ideas sparked by what I may have said in terms of our model. And again, that's participation and focusing on things that are positive and within one's control, and to not overwhelm, and not to scare, and not to spark anger. If we can talk about that, I would love. We're being recorded, so I can go back and get the ideas later. But maybe I'll write notes down too. But that about wraps it for me. And if you're not, if you have an idea that strikes you later, or if this Zoom dialogue proves too unwieldy, feel free to contact myself or Cecily. Our email addresses are there. That was longer than I intended to talk, but I hope it was informative. And I think at this point, I was told I could just kind of call on people. So I'm going to give myself a full, I guess I'll stop sharing. I'm going to take away this email address. So write it down when you can. But I'm going to stop sharing. That makes sense, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And then I think I'm just, we got these chats.
Oh, they're something else. You don't need to worry about them at the moment, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. We'll maybe for later or something, but I'm just going to go from the top corner that I can see and ask Jeanette if you want to, I don't know if that hand is still.
No, I put it up there for you now. I was wondering if you've looked at the sort of the business model of the Berkeley side and the Oakland side magazine things that are online.
I'm very glad you brought that up. I think Berkeley side's amazing. The level, I think, and I don't want to, get too, I don't want to blow smoke is the phrase that comes to mind, but I think it's a bit of a testament to like Berkeley's sort of character, the fact that Berkeley residents in Berkeley, on average, seem to be much more interested in participation, right? I mean, this is obvious from the history there, but I think that's what fuels the traffic, and in general, I haven't spent a lot of time in the comments of Berkeley Side's articles. So I can't speak to the civility of the discourse.
Well, they actually have a very strict policy that you have to be talking about the subject and you can't be, off the wall.
Good.
So,
But they also bring in a fair amount of money, right? Like that's part of your point.
well, the money they got a big grant from Google, I think, actually.
Okay.
Initially to get started. Well, not to get started. They started as a grassroots organization, but they got more money in order to do, they won one of the awards of the year or something, and they'd used it to set up their Oakland version of their.
Yeah, and I don't this is truly ignorant, but Oakland side is live now, right? I take it, have they launched?
Yes.
Yeah. I think those are great models. And I feel like, definitely places for people who care to go read.
Yeah, I think the civility is something that you would want to emulate, but if you don't have the right audience, it's more difficult, I guess.
Yeah. But at the same time, you want to be able to have a meaningful dialogue. You want to have people who have arguments, right? I mean, I guess you can have arguments and still be civil, but anyway. Yeah. Carol, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, I do. When you ask the question, Steve, turn that off. When you ask the question about why does the news media exist, my answer that I thought then was to be the fourth estate and promoting democracy, because we have suffered recently through a lot of what we used to call yellow journalism, and to have somebody give us the facts that we can trust, the news media is more important than ever, I believe, at this time. And yes, it has to make money because you guys have to be paid, but that should not be its end all. I do hope that the monitor will continue. It performs an important service.
Yeah, and I think actually that it's, oftentimes these types of situations get spun in these optimistic ways, but I feel pretty good about sort of where we're headed. We have a lot of internal plans that have been under review. We've had meetings with our web developer and with some outside experts who are providing some analysis for, I should say, very affordable, close to free rates in terms of getting a sense of how we can, emulate this kind of success of places like Berkeley side, and to kind of grow our online following, and hopefully do so in a way that does not, depend upon these kinds of fear-mongering techniques that you can so often find in other places.
I also want to do a shout out to somebody watching today who used to write for the Monitor quite a bit, Gail Shickley, who is also my former co-chair of this committee. So I followed the Monitor then too.
Yeah, I saw Gail's name. I don't see it anymore. So I would.
She might have.
Yeah, she had to leave. She sent a chat notice that she had to leave. So
Okay.
she was here until just recently.
Yeah, well, it's too bad she didn't get a chance to. It would have been cool to. No, I see that now. Yes. But yeah, no, the Monitor's had a lot of great writers over the years, and I'm very appreciative of them all. So I'm glad Gail could make it out for a spell. I have a question to the group, since we're all here. What are the environmental issues, and if you could be specific, that are sort of most interest to you, that are really getting you kind of animated and thoughtful and consuming a lot of your time and energy?
Sorry, can I ask a question
Of course.
before you get into that?
Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering what the readership tracking, if you're doing it, of Cecily's notes versus the print version versus, say, what do you estimate, bulletins from elected officials, which have the same kind of material of involved people?
Yeah.
Do you have some sense of the relative appeal of any of those formats?
Yeah, we we use, to send out notes, that goes out on MailChimp, which is a program a lot of you are probably familiar with. I think Berkeley League maybe uses Constant Contact. So MailChimp provides numbers. It's almost creepy, the extent to which it's able to track who's opening and for how long and at what time of day. So off the top of my head, there's 1,700 people who receive it. Typically 400 people open it. And then between 30 to 50 people go ahead and then click on it. So, I think, so MailChimp provides sort of standards or comparisons. So for a nonprofit, a comparable nonprofit, our those rates that I just told you about are quite high. They're above average. So that's encouraging. And I think, obviously we want people, given what I was all saying, that we want people to click through so they can take the survey or comment or go to the webinar. But 400 people reading that stuff, it doesn't mean that they aren't going to that site eventually or aren't doing something. Cecily writes it in such a way that you can still get a sense of the pertinence, the details, and eventually plug into that, on your own. And then right now I mentioned sort of the consultancy. I don't like to say consultancy because it's less, that implies money. And there's just a small stipend being attached to this work. I don't have the results of the work yet. It's being done now. So I can't answer that question definitively. And then in terms of, as much as I love print, all I can say is we send out, 3,000 copies, but who reads them, what happens there, that's sort of a black box. So yeah, there's not a lot of time left, so we can also just break if people don't have thoughts, but I do have, because we're going to be doing this with local leagues anyway, so might as well start the ball rolling now. The specific, environmental issues that are on your mind now, maybe an article that you read or something that the Berkeley League is working on, or somebody else in a group that you're a part of has been talking to you about, or just generally, if you feel like something more general is on your mind about sea level rise, all those kinds of things. I'd be curious to hear from folks what's on your mind for those types of topics.
Nobody wants to be first, I guess. Sally.
This is not a well thought out comment, but I'm interested in the machinations or the verbiage or whatever you want to call it, with Biden's administration vis-a-vis Build Back Better, Thrive, the Green New Deal, jobs, jobs, jobs. I mean, it's fascinating to me that this terminology is just swirling around with various degrees of toxicity and acceptance. And I don't really have, it interests me, that's all. And I don't have any particular insight into it.
Yeah, so our June edition, Leslie will be writing about microgrids, and she and I were talking, usually I talk with all the writers ahead of their stories so that we can kind of brainstorm and figure out ways to approach these things. So I think that, and maybe Eric can speak to this better than I can, but in terms of, microgrids and their development, there is a lot of opportunity for that kind of work, that when you say Green New Deal, this is the kind of spending that, you could put towards something like microgrids, right? And as I understand it, there's not only a lot of opportunity to help make our energy system more efficient, but also allow people to go to work, on the infrastructure that would be required for these kinds of things. It seems like a big opportunity on not just on a energy efficiency and greenhouse gas front, but also on a workforce development front and a social justice equity front as well. The thing that I have to say, and I sort of left it out of this presentation, is that, and you referred, I think you touched on it, Sally, in your comment, but it is, for whatever reason, now a partisan issue, right?
I know.
And so, yeah, so, that is a bit of a, I don't know if limitation is the right word, but as far as what the monitor is able to kind of do, vis-a-vis Green New Deal and kind of, the types of work that would be a part of the Green New Deal is the kind of stuff we cover all the time. but then to link it specifically to a politician becomes a thornier problem for us. And unfortunately, those who cover it, who are allowed to cover it in terms of the politician, often focus on stuff like what they tweeted and how they made somebody mad, or did they wear the wrong clothes, or something that's completely superficial to the actual policy. So it's unfortunate that when we do focus on the politicians themselves, we focus on, again, like I was saying before, it's sort of the emotional piece of things. But I feel like there is just a massive amount of work to be done in considering, works projects that advance energy goals and help out communities that have been struggling for employment opportunities. It just seems like there's so much to be done there, and I would hope that we can move the ball forward on that. And I do think that that's something that I'd love to see the Monitor continue to, because we've been covering that stuff for a long time, but continuing to dig into it and to look at those innovations and those opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. It gets so much more complicated when politicians get involved.
Sure does.
And of course, they have to be involved.
They do. Carol, do you have another?
I could say some here. Some of these things with the environment have to do with technology. So getting an expert from LVL, somebody or anywhere, to explain the technology would be helpful. Microgrids, how are they set up? How big does a neighborhood have to be to have a microgrid? How many batteries do you need? All sorts of things like that. And what is a sensible microgrid if there's a power outage? And how is it controlled? There might not be adequate batteries so that every house can run full bore, so everybody's going to have to cut back. There's all these kind of technical things, and so getting people who have thought about that might be nice to have them.
Yeah, I think it's imperative anytime we cover a subject to, especially if it's technical, to speak with experts and researchers. Our last edition that came out in April, we had sort of a loose, informal theme of science, right? And so everybody who was writing articles for us had some citation to a research study. And actually, the Berkeley lab was mentioned in Cecily's article as one of the alternate research facilities that was participating in this Stanford SLAC laboratory battery investigation. So, yeah, I think those types of things it's imperative to put that hard data and research into the articles. I think it's a challenge to translate that material to audiences, to give them that information in a form that's palatable and accessible. Thankfully, the Monitor readership tends to skew a little bit more, technically oriented and with an appetite for that kind of nitty-gritty, dense information. But anyway, I think, point well taken, Eric. I feel like it's always critical to have that expertise in the information you're putting out there.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
I don't know if you're familiar with this guy. I'm very impressed with him. His name is Saul Griffith.
Okay.
He's
Does ring a bell?
Saul, S-A-U-L, Griffith, G-R-I-F-F-I-T-H, I guess. He's an Australian energy expert. He's incredibly knowledgeable and dynamic, and he's fascinating to listen to. His book, and maybe his website too, it's called Electrify Everything.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's really great. His presentation is just so filled with data and insight and information, and I really like him a lot.
Okay.
That's my
His name is Sally?
Saul, S-A-U-L, Griffith, Griffith, like Griffith Park.
Okay.
He's a McDonald, what do they call it? A genius, what do they call it?
MacArthur genius.
MacArthur genius. Yeah, he's also very cute. Anyway. That's all.
I will put his I put his thing in the chat here since I have found it.
Waiting to speak, Carol?
If no, but I mean, I spoke already, but sure. One thing that I always comes to mind with me is the protecting biodiversity by protecting habitat for biodiversity. They don't vote, they don't pay money. And I think it's really, really important and often gets overlooked. So that's an answer to your question, Alec, about what various people are worrying about.
Yeah, that's great. So we do, I think it's really important. I'm glad you brought it up. And I think we definitely try to highlight that. The challenge I tend to have with those stories are that I feel like many of us buy in immediately. And then there's also this contingent of the populace that is less, they're just like, why, who cares? Like, so it's a tricky one. So like in our current edition, we have an article about tricolored blackbirds. And so I was really pushing the writer to try and illuminate why it was, her story focuses on the preservation of this one species of blackbird. But to provide the reader with some sense of why it's important beyond that one species, like why that, yes, I see the, thank you, the photo there, very good. For those who may not reflexively, like I think all of us on this call feel like is an important priority. But yeah, it's something that we do a lot. And actually, one more thing on that I wanted to mention in terms of the individual action piece and getting people, to participate, like Peter doing his drain adoption, or cooking more plant-based foods, or those types of opportunities. One thing that we've covered a few times, and I've written about for other outlets too, is our Blitzes, right? So I don't know if they're they sort of were enjoying a moment, and I don't know if they're quite as all the rage anymore. But for those of you who have never heard of a BioBlitz, it's kind of a communal event by which you get a large group of people together in a finite geographic area, let's say a park, or maybe a stretch of a stream, or maybe a valley or a mountain. And within that defined boundary, everybody takes out a photographic device, probably a cell phone, but you could also do with a camera. And you try to find as many species as you can within that area. It's an inventory. So it can tell you, for example, like, well, our, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be fauna, it can be flora too, but typically you're focused on animals. But you could track, like, well, there's X number of California poppies within this area, or we found this many monarch butterflies in this area. And so, usually you use a database like iNaturalist to then log all those observations, and that can help scientists get a sense of whether or not a population is regressing or rebounding, or what the rhythms and routines are for the species in that designated area. And it's just a good way to be out in nature with a bunch of other people and kind of feel like, again, like you're doing something, right? Like monarch butterflies may be endangered, but at least you're out here with some friends, trying to help them out. And I think that's a powerful thing for us to do in the face of a problem that feels so large otherwise.
Can I make one quick comment about some of this? Is that I think one of the things that we've learned in the last couple of years, and especially now with the pandemic and everything, is how related all the problems are to each other, and how we actually have to look at, if you want to look at saving the birds, you have to look at having cows, or you have to, they're all interrelated. And so I think that one thing the Monitor can do and does do is have these sort of what looks like diverse stories, but they actually are all part of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's wholeheartedly agree. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, I think sort of the philosophical basis of the publication is interconnectedness, and how what happens in Marin County should affect what happens in Alameda. And so being able to elucidate those relationships, be it between, two jurisdictions of government, or two species, or a habitat in one place and a resource in another place.
Or a community
that is
in a community that's been underserved, and getting them linked into having a better environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's actually like Robin Meadows' article from the current edition about sort of seawalls and what effects they may have on other municipalities, is kind of speaks to that specific point. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, critical.
So it is slightly past 9 o'clock. And so I want to thank you so much, Alec, for the work that you do.
Yes.
We'll look for your byline in the future. And this has been a very good, interesting discussion. And thank you, everybody, for attending.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. It's been
Thank you.
great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alex.
So
Thank you.
long.